Meet Jack. Jack is your typical average squirrel. Jack goes to school, listens to music, and even eats at the local burger shop. One day while zooming to the burger shop, Jack was in a hurry and not paying attention to where he was going and accidentally smacked into Mr. Rabbit carrying a flower. Bang, smash, clang, the two of them collided, and Jack stepped on and destroyed the flower. "Ow, ow, ow," said Mr. Rabbit. "You've stepped on my flower and sprained my ankle. You must go to the mountain with the tall cliffs. Retrieve a new flower from there and take it to the mountaintop." "Ha ha! What?" said Jack. Jack had heard of people that have died on the mountain, and even though Jack may have been rushing and not looking where he was going, he's not about to admit to that, nor go on some errand for Mr. Rabbit. "No, I think this is just as much your fault as it is mine, and I'm in a rush." And with that, Jack sped on. When Jack got to the burger shop that day for lunch, the stag asked him why he was late. When the stag found out that Jack made a rabbit drop a flower, he quickly handed Jack his regular in a to-go bag and spookily repeated the same words the rabbit said. "You must go to the mountain with the tall cliffs. Retrieve a new flower from there and take it to the mountaintop." After this, the stag walked away. This was unusual because Jack knew the stag to be more helpful. This unsettled Jack so much that after he walked out of the burger shop, he decided to walk over to his friend Mr. Bear's house and ask for help. Said Mr. Bear. "I don't know why you're being asked to climb the mountain, but if I know anything, it's that rabbits and flowers are a big deal. I don't know why, but if you go on this journey, I'll give you this. I think it's a pine cone, but the skunk said it's an iPhone 7. Use it to contact me on my pine cone." And with that, Mr. Bear handed Jack the squirrel the pine cone, pushed him out the den, closing the door, leaving Jack, the squirrel, all alone outside. Well, at this point, Jack realized he had harmed Mr. Rabbit, although he was still not entirely sure how bad, and was unsure what this climb up the mountain had to do with it. But sure enough, the more Jack thought about what Mr. Rabbit, the stag, and Mr. Bear all said, the more it was clear to Jack that A. Jack had harmed Mr. Rabbit. B. Jack had to repair that harm by climbing the mountain. C. Jack was almost certainly bound to smack into another animal on his way up the mountain if he didn't take some time to understand what about him caused him to do it in the first place. Jack thought and thought about this as he climbed the mountain. All of a sudden, Jack saw a rabbit, and it bounded right by Jack. "Well," thought Jack, "I'm glad I wasn't in a rush. Whenever I'm in a rush, I don't look where I'm going." It hit him, and without a moment's notice, Jack pulled out his pine cone and called Mr. Bear to tell him the marvelous revelations he had made about himself. Mr. Bear was very kind, provided a listening ear, and remained free of judgment. As Jack ended the call, a depressing thought came over him. It would take him twice or even 3 times as long to climb the mountain if he didn't rush. What was he to do? No one could see him rushing. And even if he did hit another rabbit holding a flower, would it really be that big of a deal? Jack thought and thought, and all Jack could think was he believed Mr. Rabbit, the stag, and Mr. Bear that he did cause harm. And he was not the kind of squirrel to just keep causing harm. So with that, Jack made the decision he would change. He would not rush and continued up the mountain. Just then, Jack's best friend, Speedy Squirrel, came zooming up the mountain. "Hi, Jack," said Speedy as he stared into his shiny new pine cone. "Hi, Speedy." "What you doing, Jack?" said Speedy. Just walking up the mountain." "Why aren't you speeding up like me?" "'Cause I've realized that rushing around is not for me." "Come on, Jack, it's gonna take you forever to climb all the way up that big mountain. Just speed up. No one will know. And if you crash into them, just speed away like I do," said Speedy. Jack began to get unsettled, for he heard stories about people falling off the mountain Now he's hearing stories about Speedy Squirrel speeding all around the mountain while he stares into his pine cone. "Speedy," said Jack, "have you ever knocked someone off the mountain?" Jack began to look at his life, if he kept rushing around with his head down, if it got worse, and perhaps if he changed.
"Have I? Well, I do my best not to find out."
And with a glance back down to his pine cone and a zoom, he was gone. Jack made a pledge right there and then that no matter the situation, Jack would not go rushing, zooming, or any other kind of squirrely speed without looking where he was going. And Jack was going to slow down a lot more and really start looking where he was going. And with that, he continued up the mountain, looking where he was going. What seemed like hours later, Jack could see in the distance, up on a lower ridge of the mountaintop, was a patch of the flowers that Mr. Rabbit was holding. Closer and closer Jack got to the flower patch. He noticed a signpost sticking out of the ground, but he could not read it. When he got directly in front of the flower patch and the sign, he could tell it was a very old sign. The writing was very faded, and Jack could only make out the sign's big lettered title, "The Memorial Flower." Memorial, thought Jack. Jack still did not know exactly how he had hurt Mr. Rabbit, but with this further information, it became clear to Jack that this flower was special. This journey was special. Jack plucked the flower like he was instructed by Mr. Rabbit so long ago that he remembers laughing at Mr. Rabbit at the time. He remembers acting like Speedy. Oh, if only Jack could apologize to Mr. Rabbit. Jack would not laugh now. Jack would feel horrible for ruining a memorial flower and horrible for hurting Mr. Rabbit. Jack knew what he should do then. He pulled out his pinecone and called Mr. Bear for some last-minute advice on his apology. But Mr. Bear was not there. Jack thought nothing of it, as Mr. Bear is well known for napping, and continued up the mountain. Some time later, Jack came to a mountain road, and a Jeep pulled up with Mr. Rabbit in it.
"Get in! There's no time to waste."
Jack agreed, for now was the time to apologize. Jack jumped in the Jeep, and away up the mountain they went. "I want to apologize," said Jack.
"No, first I need to know, will you take this flower to the top of the mountain?"
Faster and faster up the mountain the Jeep drove. Jack was still confused. Here was Mr. Rabbit, and here was the flower. Couldn't Mr. Rabbit take the flower to the top of the mountain? Were we driving in that direction now? Yeah, sure," said Jack. "I promise I'll take the flower to the top of the mountain."
Thank you, thank you, thank you."
"I'd like to apologize. I was not looking where I was going when I was speeding the other day, and I've made a conscious effort to slow down and to always look where I'm going."
"Thank you so much for the apology, but honestly, you taking the flower to the top of the mountain is all I really wanted."
And with that, the Jeep stopped. Mr. Rabbit opened the door, and Jack stepped out. Mr. Rabbit leaned over to Jack and said something, but the fierce mountain winds were too strong to hear, and before Jack could find out, Mr. Rabbit drove the Jeep away. The wind was blowing and blowing, and all Jack could see was the tip of the mountain and a signpost similar to the one he saw earlier in the Memorial Flower Patch. Jack reflected on how much he had learned about Mr. Rabbit and memorial flowers, and yet how much more he still didn't know. It took all the effort Jack could muster to push against the fierce mountain winds as he reached the top of the mountain. When he was directly in front of the very old weathered sign, he could read it this time. "Flying Squirrel Memorial Flower Carriers Launch Site. Place flower in mouth. Extend all paws out and think of the person you are bringing this medicine to." Medicine? That's it. Someone's in trouble. Someone needs help. But flying squirrel, that's something out of a movie. That's not real. Or if the journey brought him to this moment, and if he trusted the journey up until now, then, without another moment's hesitation, Jack the squirrel placed the memorial flower in his mouth
extended both paws, and swoosh, the mountain air picked him up. Sailing and floating, he settled down gently to the mountainside clinic. Popping down beside the clinic, Jack couldn't believe his adventure. But someone was in trouble. He opened the door to the clinic, and there, looking sickly in bed, was Mr. Bear's father. "Thank you, said Jack's friend Mr. Bear. "When you left, I got a call from Mr. Elephant saying my father was ill. I came here right away and found out that Mr. Rabbit was getting a memorial flower for medicine for my dad."
"Yes," said Mr. Elephant. "Thank you for sharing the memorial flower. Now that we have this, Mr. Bear's father will be okay." After this adventure, Jack was no longer Jack the Squirrel, but now Jack the Flying Squirrel, always looking where he was going and trusting in his character, his friends, and the experiential process to guide the way.